Welcome to Positive Recovery MD. If you're listening, chances are you want to create happiness around you and thrive in your life. We're glad you're here and you've come to the right place. This podcast will inspire and motivate you to not merely survive your recovery journey, we'll give you the tools to build or strengthen your foundation to thrive and flourish in your life. Each week, we'll come together as a community to have authentic conversations around addiction, recovery, and what matters. Growth and progress, not perfection. All while developing positive habits for you to utilize in your life. To learn more, please visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to receive the daily positive interventions that we'll review, as well as gain access to exclusive Positive Recovery content available only to Positive Recovery MD listeners. All right, let's get started.
Good day, boys and girls, ladies and gentlemen. Welcome to another installment of Positive Recovery's MD podcast with your hosts, Jason Powers, Julie DeNofa. We've got a special guest, Dow Hickam. This is a podcast that hopefully will give you a little bit of oomph in order to thrive, whether it's in recovery, at work, at home, hobbies, whatever. So the reason we have Dow Hickam on, and before I actually introduce you, I got in trouble at work for researching this next guest, Dow, because he has a lingerie store and someone was looking over my shoulder. I'm like, no, I'm doing research, I promise. And anyway, I had to go to HR. It was a big mess. Anyway, thank God, I didn't get written up. It was all, I showed your picture and your website, best store for so many years. And that's not why I had you on, even though Julie was saying, you know what, we don't have enough ladies undergarment representation on this podcast. And I was like, well, look, I found somebody. That's not why I asked him to be on. We had dinner, I don't know, a few weeks ago and the time before that, but I really got to know Dow. What stood out wasn't the ladies undergarment thing, although, quite frankly, you don't meet that many people who own lingerie stores and kill it the way he does. It was the work that you've done personally and the volunteering that you've done and, giving back, even on a small basis. I just thought you would be a great guest. So welcome, Dow. We are going to ask you to introduce yourself. And the way this works is a positive introduction is you at your best. It's a story that would tell the listeners or viewers or whatever what Dow is when he's really in his element. And it's a specific story that happened in space and time with other people or not. But I'm going to give you an example of my positive introduction. And just to let you know, it's something that we do in our treatment centers as an introduction to the group and the facility in a way, because across the country and the world, like the first introduction that a new patient who's scared and sort of doesn't know anybody says is like, what brought you here? And they say all the bad stuff they did to get in, and they make a list of all the drugs or alcohol or other processes that they use. And it really doesn't help engender trust or anything. So the positive introduction is actually a tool of positive psychology where you get to just tell a story about you at your best, and it can be you at your good enough. My story begins with my brother's death. Suddenly, I was in med school, 1995. He died suddenly of a heart condition. I was wrecked. I was completely wrecked. What happened in the experience of the community sort of coming together and the power of others, it made me realize or experience community for the first time. I always thought funerals were really depressing, and they can be. They are sometimes. And I always like Yogi Berra's quote, like, if I don't go to their funeral, they won't go to mine. But since that experience of like seeing everybody there, I was changed. And I actually went to one of my parents' friends' daughters died suddenly. I went to their funeral. I didn't really know them. And in 24 hours, I was sort of talking to the parents, helping them. And that's me at my best. Is just, I don't remember what I said. I don't know how I found the time. I was doing an internship at the time. It was like 120 hours a week. But I felt like I was being pushed by something. Now, it could just be, that feeling of synapses in the brain. You can explain it, but the why to me is the most important. And it was a spiritual experience. And it's really like when I get out of my own way and I'm helping others, I can be like a vessel, at least in the way that I feel I'm helping. That's me at my best. So you can think for a moment about like something you did that your wife, your best friends, family would say, yeah, that's Dowing.
Well, my name's Dow Hickam. I guess my positive introduction would be, I grew up and I was very shy. I was the kind of person that would hide behind my mother's skirt and never had a lot of confidence and things like that. And then that continued throughout my life until I found drugs and alcohol, and I suddenly was social, and I saw the power in being social and the thrill I could get out of it and the fun I could get out of it. And, being sober for so long, I feel one of the things I've gotten out of sobriety is I've known myself better. And I feel with that self-knowledge, I'm more confident in who I am and where I am and what I'm supposed to be doing. I can go anywhere and talk to anyone pretty much about anything. And I'm happy to do so. I really enjoy it. And I find myself able to try to help people the best I can when I'm being social. So I really went from being this social recluse to a social butterfly. And I wouldn't even say a butterfly. I'm comfortable in my own skin enough to be able to talk to people I don't necessarily know or that don't know me. And oftentimes I'll find that that's some of the most interesting conversations and ways that I can be of service to others by striking up conversations with people I don't know.
So does any one conversation stand out? You had like a micro moment, and these things, the reason why I say micro moments, it's actually a finding from studying genes. Like little moments between people can actually change gene expression. So whether you're kind or not can affect how your body is processing stress hormones and how your body's either healing or not. And really, like, Julie, just so you know, like the feeling I got talking to Dow was a positive micro moment. And it wasn't even necessarily learning about his deep spiritual practices. And I hope he shares that when we do the story. But so it's probably hard for you to like think of one. But was there any like reaction in somebody else that you were like not proud, no hubris, but like, okay, yeah, I could feel the cortisol decreasing and the epinephrine going up or whatever, dopamine?
When I met my wife, actually on our first date, that would have been one of those instances where in the past I would have been shy or used chemicals to, give me the liquid courage or whatnot to be able to go talk to her. We met, we went out to dinner and had the most wonderful conversation. And I truly felt for the first time dating or in the dating world that I was able to just be myself and I would be okay with that. I rather enjoyed that. And from that confidence, I move on to other conversations. I mean, I've had just fun conversations. I've come to really enjoy people. And once I take myself and my own insecurities out of it, it's a really a great opportunity to get to know others.
Well, cool. So let us get to know you.
My parents divorced when I was 2. I don't have any memory of them being together. In addition to that, there was a socioeconomic discrepancy too. My father, after the divorce, became incredibly successful in business, and my mother never really was. And so I had my mother got remarried, and I have a half brother there who I'm 7 years older. But growing up in this one household that had kind of a very modest middle class upbringing, and then I was private school and had I'd every other weekend I'd go to my dad's house and we'd go do fun things like go to Disneyland or some other fun places. And so there was this kind of I never felt like I fit in here or there sort of thing growing up with that different experience in either world. And that being the same, I had a world with, and it, maybe this was the start of some of my psychological issues, but compartmentalizing. Okay, I have a life with my mother on this side and a life with my father on this side, and I didn't want those two to meet or intermingle in any way. And I was perfectly happy with that being at the way it was. I can remember getting 2 allowances, and because my parents didn't really like to talk to each other, neither one knew what they were getting me. So I was learning to manipulate the situation when I was very young by letting my mother know that my dad wasn't giving me as much as he was, and letting my dad know that my mother wasn't giving me as much as she was. And one of the examples of me growing up, but I also early on developed, and it took a lot of years on psychologist couches to figure this out, but there was some core issue that got rocked in that divorce where I had this incredible fear of abandonment. After the divorce, and I was primarily living with my mother, I absolutely did not want to disappoint her at all. I would go to great lengths to not upset her, to attempt to appease her. I was absolutely terrified that I was going to get her angry. I learned now much later that I had some fear of abandonment about that I did not want to lose her. And I must have, in my 2-year-old mind, must have done something wrong to make my daddy go.
Yeah.
And somehow I'm not. Yeah, somehow, I've already lost one parent. I can't lose this last one I've got. So I do everything I could to keep that. And that dynamic of needing to be healed by a woman in my life and needing a relationship and not wanting to disappoint her, all this stuff, plays itself over and over and over again in my life, until well into recovery, actually.
When did you get introduced to substances as a way to kind of soothe that fear?
14. It was to impress a girl. She was older, 14, and she was, 15 going on 16. I really liked her a lot and wanted to spend more time with her. And she and her friends had some alcohol, and my friends and I got some, and we got together, and I got blackout drunk the first time. It was the worst hangover I ever had in my life. Still, even after, long experience drinking, it was the worst hangover I've ever had. I still get nauseous just thinking about tequila. So I need to say I did not impress her. And because I ended up having to be, basically restrained. And then I woke up in my own sick, and it was just a scene. So that was my first interaction with alcohol. And that's, kind of set the scene. I've heard of type A and type Bs. I don't know if they really exist, but I was always one of these drinkers. And I did this with my drug abuse too, is that I dove right into it. There was no long fuse. It was a very fast and quick use. People that knew me often would tell me that that I seemed to be drinking with some sort of purpose, not to enjoy life and to have fun, but to escape and go into some other realm of existence whereby I was searching for something, but I didn't know what I was going to find or how to find it.
So what caused you to get into either treatment or recovery, if it was the same time? Like your first episode of recovery, what was the intervention?
My girlfriend at the time, high school girlfriend, walked in on my apartment, and after a weekend long bender, and saw a coffee table littered with beer bottles and bongs and other sorts of paraphernalia. And she didn't know about this in me, and she was absolutely scared out of her mind, like she should be. And she left. I got in some trouble, or my stepfather got in some trouble and gone to treatment when I was 7. And I had some experience with recovery through others then. So I knew that there was some other way that I could do this. And I knew there was I had this dueling thought in my mind. I was like, I need discipline. I'm going to go join the Navy, or I need treatment. And I somehow deep down inside, I knew that treatment was the right option. So I did. I packed my bags and tied a good one on that night, and then checked into treatment the following day. I really didn't look back at that point. I was 19 years old. It really embraced it wholeheartedly and jumped in, did all the work I needed to do, and experienced a good measure of recovery for quite a long time. It was 5 years.
I remember, and I really loved your rationalization as how, like, you got sober young. Mm-hmm. Yeah, tell us, like, what, because you were sober for many years, right?
I was sober for many, and I've heard it before that picking up the drink is the actually last thing that happens in a relapse. And so in an autopsy of my relapse, I had to go through and look at it. And when I had about 4 years sober, that girlfriend that I got sober for, who is now a fiance, decided she didn't want to get married the following June.
That's right.
And there were a number of other things that kept cropping up during the intervening year, any one of which I felt like I could have turned the ship around had I had enough awareness, but I didn't. Just one thing after another happened in my life, and it kept dragging me down this slippery slope till eventually, I stopped meeting with my support system and started having behaviors crop up, sleeping around with other people and doing all kinds of misbehaviors. And so I developed this rationale. I saw myself as somewhat of an intellectual, and I remember reading some study, and it was a big study, but the conclusion essentially was 99.8% of people that have had physical addiction to alcohol cannot resume to any sort of moderated drinking. And that, the idea of, once a cucumber becomes a pickle, you can never go back to a cucumber.
I've heard that before.
Yeah. So my rationale was, well, must have been rash when I was 19. I think I was a bit rash in making that decision. Sure, I was drinking alcoholically. I think I was drinking about a 6-pack of beer a day. And I was smoking weed from morning to night. And occasionally on the weekends, I do harder bottles and cocaine and things like that. But that I hadn't crossed over into that I still was a cucumber at my core. And I may have been very well on my way, but I was young and immature, being 19 years old. And now that I was all of 24 and, aware of life, I thought, I need to go find this out. I need to go down to my, nearest bar and sit down and take a drink and honestly ask myself if I wanted more. So I developed this elaborate rationale, and I told my people in my support groups about it, and I told my parents about it, and everyone was worried to death about me. They said, why would you do this? Why would you even risk it? The damage could be, incalculable. Why would you even attempt this? And in my mind, I honestly believed it was not that big of a risk. I was coming from this place of, when I was 19, I went to a treatment center and started following suggestions, and life got better really fast. And it was kind of like flipping a switch. One day I was drinking, and the next day, okay, I'm a person that doesn't drink. And I fell into this, mindset where the obsession for drugs and alcohol was relieved immediately. And that was my thought was, well, at the first sign of trouble, I will go get help and I'll get back to where I was when I was 19. And, I'll skip along my merry way and everything will be fine. So I did. I started, I planned my relapse, and I did relapse. It wasn't long. It wasn't like the next night or anything, but it wasn't long that I think at some point, if you could have accessed my inner darkest thoughts, I would have admitted that this is not going the way I thought it was going to go. I thought I'd be able to control this like a normal person, but there was no way you could get me to admit that in person, especially after the big going back out, statement I had made to everyone and so on and so forth. So I backed myself into a corner here, and there was no escaping it. And I really honestly didn't have any desire to stop it. The obsession was already on me. So, I quickly devolved into this situation where I was drinking, when I was 19, it was a 6-pack a night and, harder stuff on the weekends. And then it was going out and hard stuff I'd drink a 6-pack before I went out, and then I'd go hit up the hard liquor at the bars. And then there would be cocaine and weed all day long. And this became my life. And it progressively got worse and worse and worse over the years. My relapse was ultimately about 7 years long. And there were trips to jails, there were wrecked cars, there were multiple trips to treatment centers. The damage I did to my friendships and my career even were really, really horrible. And all those fears that with the exception of death, all the fears that everyone had for me about finally about relapsing and drinking again came true. Even if they weren't my fears, they were other people's fears for me, and they really did. They came true. I ended up addicted to crack, alcohol, everything I could not say no to any drug or pill or whatever that came along my way.
Dow, what finally brought you to your knees?
The final straw was I got arrested again, and this time it was for DUI, which was not a surprise to anyone that would have ever heard it. And I was sitting in the drunk tank. I was just tired. I was tired of living that way. I was defeated emotionally, mentally, physically. I was just tired. And I was finally ready to surrender to the fact that I had become a pickle. It's a strange thing because I actually came to that realization about the pickle several years before, almost 3 or 4 years before, when I went to bed one night and I had this mild flu-like symptoms. And it suddenly dawned on me I didn't have any alcohol that night. And that clearly I am having detox from alcohol. And that I remember noting that in my head that, I am now the pickle. But at that point in time, what I was really looking for was, okay, I need some kind of harmful consequence that's going to slap me upside the head and make me realize that this is enough. The problem is the harmful consequences kept getting, bigger and bigger and bigger, but nothing seemed to snap me out of it.
Just send me a sign. Yeah. Another sign. Right.
Yeah. It just
another sign.
Exactly. But there was nothing that would slap me out of it. And so by the time I finally did surrender, I wasn't in more trouble than I'd ever been in, or I wasn't more drunk, or the harmful consequences certainly were not as harmful as other situations I had been in. But I had finally just reached this place where I was ready to do whatever it took to get back into recovery. And I think it was from that place of surrender that allowed me to just let go of all the preconceived notions I had about, I had 5 years before. There's nothing you can tell me about staying sober that I don't already know. I taught other people how to stay sober. What are you going to show me? And I had to let go of this ego that I had. Oddly enough, when I finally did let go of that and was able to just surrender, what I discovered is I still had that experience from before. I had all those sober experiences. And what my recovery has taught me more than anything, that what any kind of longevity being sober or in recovery does is it just grants me more experiences. And the more experiences I have in recovery, the easier it is for me to go through the next thing. And I was reading your positive intervention about, facing these fears and walking through them. And that's the first time I walked through something is really scary. Then the second time it's not as bad. And by the third or fourth time, I can do it in my sleep.
Right. And that's what we tell patients who early in recovery and they have cravings. And I say, good. And they're like, what? How is that good, doc? I'm telling you, I want crack, or I'm telling you I want to drink or whatever. I'm like, listen, it's not on the menu here. So the good news is that you can see that it's a wave that comes and goes. Like, this too shall pass might sound like just a shitty platitude. Excuse my French, right? Like, at least no. It's good to walk through things so that you can look back and say, hey, I did it then. And right. It spreads to all areas of your life because, God forbid you should, get sued or go through a divorce or, an illness of a loved one or whatever it might be. There's no armor that prevents pain in life. Right. But self-efficacy is a thing that says, you know what, I've gotten through hard things before. I can get through this. Not going to be pleasant, but yeah. And I don't have to do something self-destructive just in order to get through it.
Right.
And so tell us about, I know you helped or you taught a class at the Houston Council, or am I off?
I did. Shortly after getting sober this time, I got into yoga. I was actually running a lot and my hamstrings were tight. And so someone suggested to me to go to yoga class. So I did. And I discovered that yoga isn't just about PE class. I mean, there's an aspect of yoga that's PE class, but there's this whole that's just the tip of the iceberg. There's this whole other part of yoga that actually is spiritual and has, some really interesting spiritual axioms and they call them limbs, the 8 limbs of yoga. At least that's what the Yoga Sutras talk about. So I started noticing all these parallels from yoga to the program and the program to yoga. And I thought, this would be interesting to create a yoga class for people in recovery, because I know a lot of yoga is really hot right now. A lot of people like yoga, and this would be a great thing to do. My wife is a yoga teacher. I met her actually A funny story. I saw her in a yoga class and I didn't have enough courage to talk about, walking through your fears. I didn't have enough courage to ask her out that night. But I said to myself, I'm going to come back to the same class next week. And if I saw her again, I'd have to ask her out. Turns out I saw her the very next night at a social event. So it worked out just fine. And
she was never going to go back to that class.
She was never going to go back to that class.
So yeah,
she hated that class. It was, hot, sweaty yoga, and it had, it was not quite her level. My wife is really the yogi in the family, and she has studied it for 20 years. So my wife agreed to help me create this yoga for recovery. And we didn't start out at the council. We started out in yoga studios around town just through personal relationships we had with people. And it was a class where my wife was kind of teaching the poses and I was talking about recovery and so forth. And then I went and got some proper training from a man named Eric Schiffman in Santa Monica. And he's this amazing yogi who has this really unique perspective that's really influenced me and my idea of a higher power in my life and how he communes with his higher power. I just love his teachings. So I brought what I learned from life, from recovery, from my wife and from my teacher back to this class and started teaching it alone. And I moved several locations with it and finally ended up at the Houston Council, although it wasn't called that back then. We had this beautiful, beautiful little class that, I had a 92-year-old man walked in there and said he was there for his first class. And I was, amazed. Old Wiley H.
Yeah,
and,
Wiley.
Yeah. He walked in there and he had a back problem and he says, please help. I've heard I need yoga for my back. And then we had other people in there that were, prominent teachers in town who were there because their kids had problems with substance abuse and they wanted to learn more about recovery as well. So it really brought a mix of people to that class. It was a beautiful class and I taught it for several years. I stopped teaching it when my son was born. So that would have been in 2013 and passed the mantle along to others. And I've been so pleased that there have been other people that have picked it up and run with it. But, for a long time, that was how I viewed a lot of my giving back was, through that recovery class, because I really enjoyed teaching it and it benefited me more than anything else to bring those two joys in my life together.
Yeah, I love that. And I love that about your story. And I did yoga early in recovery and my brain is like, I have ADD and it's just like a very fast. And I found that when I was doing that hot yoga, I loved it. I know a lot of people who are sober in recovery kind of like it. It's almost like a free buzz. And I know there's nothing guaranteed and that might not be entirely accurate, but it's cute and whatever. I found that when I was able to balance my body, my brain was way slower. Yeah. Right. And that's the meditative, the spiritual practice. So yeah, thanks for giving back. And we're going to go into some rapid fire questions now. So just answer whatever comes to your head. So what's your favorite sound?
The rain.
And your least favorite sound?
My kids screaming.
What's your favorite word?
Love.
And your least favorite word?
Hate.
And what gets you going?
People. Conversations. What
turns you off?
What does turn me off? Probably the lack of, being shut out. That's the biggest turn off is it's being shut out.
And let's say in an alternate universe, what would Dow Hickam love to have a try at as far as vocation?
Singing.
What? Singing?
Singing.
Oh,
sing.
Can you sing?
I cannot sing.
Oh,
not at all. Come on. What's your favorite song? Let's hear something.
I cannot do it. I cannot. My wife, no, and I certainly would not. But had I had a set of pipes,
okay,
I probably would have died a long time ago from some kind of overdose because that would have been my,
rock and roll lifestyle.
If I would have had the rock and roll lifestyle, and I would have. I'd be long gone. But singing would be wonderful. And if I could carry a tune at all, I would do it for you, but I have been reassured. My daughter, who's 5, yells at me to stop singing. Anytime I'm singing with her in the car, particularly Frozen 2, anything from the Frozen soundtrack,
Yeah.
she yells at me to stop. So it's that bad that my 5-year-old doesn't want to hear it.
I hear you. I don't even sound good in the shower. But what I will ask is, who are you influenced by? What song would you sing if you felt you could belt it out?
I would sing songs by Hozier. I really like his voice and his writing style. Old Elton John, not so much on the new Elton John, but those kind of great male vocalists. George Michael was one of them. There's several of them out there.
Thank you.
What vocation, if forced to do, would you hate doing?
Janitorial.
Okay. Assuming there's a God, when you die, you're at the gates. I don't know why it's always a gated community. I mean, is it really that unsafe up there? But like the God or St. Peter, whatever. No, God. What would you want to hear coming out of God's mouth to you?
In a Mel Brooks voice, it would be ta-da. A horn. What would God?
What would you like to hear?
What would I like to hear God say? I was always there.
That's a great answer.
That is. Thank you. Thank you so much. And thank you so much for taking us, a little bit into your world. And we're going to bring you into ours a little bit with Positive Recovery Daily Guide. And we're going to do the positive intervention now. And it actually kind of fit a bit to your story too. So you reflected on it a little bit as we spoke. It opens up with a quote by Bernard Baruch. "The art of living lies not in eliminating, but in growing with troubles. Addiction often starts when drugs or behaviors are used as avoidance strategies, though the only way to truly process a problem is to walk straight through the middle of it. No matter what your problems, using numbing substances or acting out numbing behaviors will only make those problems larger and more perilous. Sometimes you cannot do anything to make things immediately better, but you can certainly worsen any situation. Just as deadly, though subtler, is when you stop working on your recovery program. Growth is not possible without pain or diligence. The minute you stop maintaining your recovery, you start moving toward a relapse. However, even those who recognize this fact too often recoil from change and troubles as if they were poisons. Recovery teaches people that living to avoid pain is not truly living at all. So we ask that you reflect on any pain or troubles in your life that you have been trying to avoid. What numbing, addictive, or avoidant behaviors have you been using to circumvent dealing with an issue? Be courageous and explorative, but don't use this exercise as a shaming weapon against yourself. Simply be mindful of any behaviors that are interfering with your growth and well-being. And a reminder for the bold is to write continuously for 20 minutes about what your ideal life looks like 10 years from now. So I say that to our listeners just so that you can get the full positive intervention. But today we'll just kind of reflect on what Dow took away from this positive intervention.
What I've identified is it's really, for me, it's where the rubber meets the road in my recovery today. And that has to do entirely with my kids. Namely, my kids, when I'm driving in the backseat of the car, they fight each other all the time. My way of coping with it eventually leads to me just yelling at them to stop and shut up and be quiet. And, and I really, afterwards, I feel as though I've I feel defeated. I feel as though I've let them down by getting angry at them over this. And it's so frustrating to me. And the only thing, I'm using my anger and my loudness to try to bully them into being quiet, and it works. But then, at the same time, I've taught them to be angry, and then they're just, they're yelling at me now, and it's clearly not working for me. And I think I do the angry thing at them specifically in the back of the car because I'm avoiding something there. I'm avoiding the powerlessness that I feel about these two of the people that I love the most in life are fighting each other in the back of the car, and I feel powerless over it. And I feel, as a parent, some sort of obligation or duty to step in and say, older boy, you can't beat up on younger girl, and younger girl, you need to be nice to older boy. And And so I'm avoiding powerless in that situation. The way I'm trying to get power is by yelling at them. And it doesn't really work like I want it to. It gets them kind of in line, but then I end up being, an emotional wreck afterwards. So that's where I need help.
Today, Julie and I have been there. Parenting. Oh, yeah.
I've researched blocks in the back of the car, like actual, they make a foam block that's fitted for your car in between the seats to keep them from seeing or touching.
Yeah, like a divider.
A divider, yeah.
Right, that's brilliant.
So I can see that definitely stirs some emotion for you. And, thank you for being so vulnerable and sharing that. And Dr. Powers did say we've had this experience and as have many of our listeners, right? For sure. And so there's no right answer to that, right? But one of the things I think that would surprise my kids the most for me is that, I would just kind of lean into them and ask them what am I supposed to do here? You guys are ready to kill one another. What do I do here? Can you guys help me figure out what to do here? Because I don't know what to do. And then they would look at each other and be like, how does she not know what to do? And then start coming up with all these crazy answers. And then we were just totally distracted by whatever it was in the first place. Mm-hmm. They would come up with crazy answers if we stop for chocolate ice cream and 3 spins around the park, that'll probably work. And then we would just build on crazy stuff and they'd get so distracted. So, look, I don't know that that's the answer, but distraction worked in our cars.
You know what I did once, Dow? They were my kids were being just so loud and unruly and it was driving me nuts. I'm like, you guys better stop or I'm going to open a can. And I was I heard myself saying it. I'm like, dude, what am I in a fraternity? And what am I doing? And I said a can of whoop-ass. And really quietly, I caught myself. I'm like, I'm not going to threaten it. And the kids are like, we want a can. We want a can. Dad's going to open a can.
Yeah. And so sometimes humor is, kind of something that can de-escalate for sure. So I remember that story from how old were your kids when that happened?
I don't know. It was just a 2. So it was a long time ago. We have 3 now. It was.
That's funny. Oh. Dr. Powers, do you want to share anything on your experience or anything around the positive psychology around this positive intervention?
Yes. I think it really boils down to more business as usual. So not as much positive psychology, but cognitive behavioral therapy. And really, if what you're trying to do, like Dow said, I think, and I'm guilty of it all the time, is to soothe your own fear. A lot of people are afraid of saying no. They don't like to say no. So they say it in a really rude or loud way to kind of I don't want to have to deal with this. But it's really it's kind of treat yourself first. And, Dow, being a parent is really tough because I know you've done a lot of work and a lot of people have who are listening on yourselves. And dude, you're a peaceful guy. But our ability to maintain peace, our bandwidth is just limited, right? And it gets eroded so that when depleted, our self-regulation, as other people call willpower, when we're depleted, everybody acts like Homer Simpson. It doesn't matter who you are. Right. And you're going to be like, oh, boy, or, whatever it might be. So I think at some point, the more work that you can do when things aren't loud and aggressive, when during the peacetime, when you do work, you're able to deal with wartime better, if that makes any sense. And I think that's it's a reminder on how, if you want emotional recovery, if you want just in general equanimity, the time to work on it isn't during crisis right after. It's when the pieces are down. Then you can start applying yourself, doing yoga, doing meditation, mindfulness, and eating well, sleeping well, moving well.
That's great.
Thank you.
That reminds me of my yoga teacher, Eric Schiffman. He talks about prayer. He says a lot of people wait to prayer about the major things like, should I get married? Should I do this or should I do that? He says that's the wrong time to start praying. He says you need to be working on the small things first, like waking up in the morning and should I have the orange juice or the apple juice this morning? And then he says, he kind of pauses for a second and clears his mind. And then something magically, is drawing him towards the apple juice. So he takes the apple juice and he says, that's the start of his prayer day is using these little decisions throughout the day to develop his intuition with his higher power. And then when a big decision comes along, it's so much easier to tap into that.
That is so profound. But I have to say, if I have him on, I'm not going to ask him what God says to him. I'm going to say, when you die, God's going to say, I told you the apple juice.
In the Mel Brooks voice, no doubt.
That's right.
That's awesome. Well, Dow, thank you so much for being with us here today. We really enjoyed listening to your story, and I'm glad to get to know you a little bit. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Dow. And ladies and gentlemen, boys and girls, thanks for listening. I know you found Dow as magical as we did. I want to thank you. I know more than Daniel and Rebecca are listening now. We had 20,000 downloads, and man, this is not a dress rehearsal. So please take care of yourselves and each other. It's all we got.
Thank you for listening to this episode of Positive Recovery MD. Don't forget to visit positiverecoverymd.com to sign up to get your daily positive intervention sent straight to your inbox. Be sure to subscribe to Positive Recovery MD on Apple Podcasts or wherever you listen to your podcasts to receive an automatic download when a new episode drops. And as always, if you or someone you know needs help, visit positiverecovery.com or call 877-4-SOBRIETY, which is 877-476-2743. We are here to help.